Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the celebration of Canadian Studies' 50th anniversary and our speaker series marking the event. And I think it's incredibly appropriate that this is taking place on International Women's Day. We're delighted that you're with us. But before we begin introductions and our conversation with Beverly Bain, I would like to ask David Newhouse, chair of the Cheney Winjack School for Indigenous Studies, to lead us through a land acknowledgement. David?
Okay, thank you, Heather. I want to take a moment to welcome you to the territory. Our event today is taking place on the Dish with One Spoon territory, on the traditional lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe, and on land that is covered by later treaties with the Crown, the Treaty 20 of 1818, and the Williams Treaties of 1923. The people who have lived on this land for millennia have a set of teachings about how to care for the land, and may we honor those teachings, and may we honor the people who lived here and the lands. And so welcome.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. And I'd like now to introduce to you our speaker, Beverly Bain. Beverly Bain is a Black, queer, radical feminist anti-capitalist scholar and a professor. She teaches on Black, queer diaspora, feminism, anti-racism, decolonization, diasporic sexualities, and gender and police violence in women and gender studies in the Department of Historical Studies at the University of Toronto, Mississauga campus, my alma mater. Bain frequently delivers lectures on gender and anti-Blackness, sexuality, abolition, and liberation nationally and internationally. She is interviewed regularly in the media on Black queer organizing and on policing and abolition. Beverly has published in numerous books and journals, including Queerly Canadian, second edition, We Still Demand, Redefining Resistance in Sex and Gender Struggles, Canadian Women's Studies, Fireweed and Conversation. Bain is currently working on a manuscript on Black queer feminist organizing in Toronto. I'd like to acknowledge that Dr. Bain has been subject to a barrage of hate-filled emails and comments on social media surrounding the announcement of her talk at Trent University. And even more generally, in regard to the work that she does. We strongly condemn those who will not only attack her views, but advocate violence and harm to racialized individuals and promote hate and violence on the basis of gender, queerness, or trans and Indigenous identities. Trent and other post-secondary institutions must support those whose voices speak against such practices, whether this includes police or other social and legal or governmental systems. We must be able to speak and respond to the harmful practices that endanger lives and well-being. Statements, questions, and arguments advocating hate or tolerating hateful attacks on those who promote justice and equality for all will not be tolerated within this webinar or in the conduct of discussions at our institution. And for that reason, we've decided today as well to undertake this as a conversation with Dr. Bain, and we won't open up for questions at the end of the webinar. Instead, I would like to introduce Karleen Pendleton Jimenez, the Associate Dean at Trent, Oshawa, and also Professor of Education, Gender, and Social Justice. And Dr. David Newhouse, who you have already met, the chair of Cheney Winjack School for Indigenous Studies. And they're going to have a conversation with Dr. Bain, and I think ask some important questions. So they'll be our voices today, and I'm just so happy to welcome Beverly Bain to our webinar. Thank you, Beverly, for coming. You're just so welcome, and we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Karleen and David. Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the celebration of your 50th year of Canadian Studies at Trent. And I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Beverly. I'm glad you're here as well. I'm Haudenosaunee. I'm Onondaga from Six Nations of the Grand River. In my tradition, the women sing the most powerful songs in ceremony, right? You know that something is important. You know that something is going to happen. when women begin to sing.
Mhm.
And women have the loudest voices and the most important voices in our community as well. And so I'm glad that you're here on this International Women's Day to add your voice and add your voice loudly to a cause for justice and equity. So thank you very much for being part of our conversations today. So,
Thank you, David. Thank you.
so I wonder if we can start, and if I can ask you to talk just a bit about your career and what you've seen right, over the last 40 years, because you've been, at the forefront and of activism, right, and the forefront of working for Black rights and developing coalitions and working for women's rights. Maybe you can start just by telling us what you've seen and what changes you've seen as well.
Well, I mean, throughout my 40 years of activism, I mean, the focus has always been on creating, a society that's livable for, particularly for those who are most disenfranchised, right? For creating a society that is actually that is anti-racist, that's that is anti-colonial, that is on an international as well as a local level, that challenges anti-Blackness, that challenges anti-Indigenous racism, that challenges gender oppression, that challenges sexism and racism, etc. I mean, that has been the work that I've done, and I've done that as a Black radical feminist activist, in the movement for Black lives, starting, I mean, the movement for Black lives, while we call it that today, there's always been a movement for the preservation and the freedom of Black lives, right? To live and be and to have livable lives. That has always been the struggle. While at different times it was called a struggle for equality, a struggle to end discrimination, the goal was also so that we can live livable lives, free from, everyday discrimination, everyday racism, everyday, free from homophobia, free from transphobia, free from, gender oppression and other gender and different forms of gender oppression. That we have always stood in solidarity in terms of the work that Black feminist radicals have done, have always stood in solidarity and worked in relations with Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women, in the struggle, to create livable futures, right? So we never called it then, we're calling it now, but the goal has always been to create a livable world, whatever that meant then, right?
Yeah.
Now, in terms of what, I see then and what I see now, I mean, what we are seeing is a resurgence in our present time, a resurgence of anti-Black racism, a resurgence of anti-Indigenous violence, right? We're seeing a resurgence of fascism. We're seeing a resurgence, of, transphobia has never actually not been an issue in our society, right? I mean, and we're seeing actually we're seeing heightened attacks on trans people in this very moment. We've seen particularly the deaths of Black trans, racialized trans people in our society, right? So we continue to see, I would argue that what we are witnessing right now is the rise of white ethno-nationalism, fascism, and ongoing attacks, on Black, racialized, and Indigenous people who are unhoused, people who are poor. We're seeing that is actually heightened in this moment. And it's heightened in this moment with the, facilitation of a capitalized, financialized, corporatized global world, right? You know, one would say that right now what we are witnessing is capitalism in crisis. And when capitalism is in crisis, we see that capitalism uses and needs capitalism to actually facilitate more of its violence within society. Thus, we see how militarized and computerized and technologized and a world of surveillance, and how that is actually been globalized, and how that is actually facilitated through policing and the prison industrial complex. So we are seeing all of that happen right now, and the way in which billions and billions of dollars are poured into, you know, policing and the policing industrial complex. We see what the RCM, we see the RCMP and the amount of resources that are fueled in that are poured into the RCMP, and this is a militarized a body that continues to extract, invade, and actually violate the rights of indigenous people on indigenous land. So we are seeing all of this happen in this current climate, and we are seeing governments and how bold and in their collusion of capital, people are being driven out of, you know, and I'm talking around the globe, their places to live. We see in Toronto, and we see in Canada and different parts of Canada, people cannot afford to live in their homes. They cannot afford to rent apartments. People are unhoused. And we see what we are witnessing is the way in which more money is poured into policing and militarization in order to police these individuals, right? We're seeing an uptake in the violence and the killings and the brutality of Black, Indigenous, and racialized and unhoused and poor people. We are living in a time of great, where, you know, our society, there's, you know, it's catastrophic. The violence, the level of violence, and the level of attacks on marginalized people. We're seeing the way in which, as Ruthie Wilson Gilmore puts it, you know, the way that organized abandonment is actually operating in our world, where our governments or cities or leaders are abandoning its population, abandoning people to poverty, abandoning them to violence. And their resolution to all of this is more militarization, more control, more surveillance, more violence visited on these communities. So we are in a crisis, but I also want to say that it's also a time where people are beginning to envision and to create and to think through new ways of of creating a different world or different worlds, you know, to live in. And we've seen this with the Black Lives Matter movement for Black Lives, the No Pride in Policing Coalition that I'm a member of. You know, we've seen this through the works of writers and poets like Dion Brand, Christina Sharp, Kenesia Lubrin. We've seen this, through artists and writers who are saying there are ways for us to rethink and to create more, a world that is one that is constituted as a new world, a visionary world. We've seen this with, in the work of indigenous writers like Leanne Betsumasaki Simpson, the work she did together with Robin Maynard. All of this we're seeing, relations being built as we think through, and we, processes of thinking through the kind of way in which we are constituting a new world. You know, writers and poets, people like, you know, across, you know, Canada, right? L. Jones on her work, you know, Idil Abdullahi on her work. There's so many Black writers and Black feminists, Black queer, radical Black feminists who are writing in a new way of life, and Indigenous women who are writing in a new way of life and a new vision and a new way to be in the world. So in as much as we are seeing a world that is in deep catastrophe, and you know, we see what's happening with the in terms of our environment, and the catastrophe, you know, the way in which our world is being destroyed by violence, by wars, by extraction, by invasion, the continued people around the world being forced from their lands, like Haiti, you know, like Latin America, and they're forced from their lands so that those lands can be, you know, financialized and bought out by big capital, right? And people are, you know, forced to move to try to escape, to save themselves. We're seeing what is happening in the Mediterranean, where people are dying. We're seeing that what is happening in our world. So as we see that, we're also seeing a refusal, and this is where that comes in, a refusal by so many of us to dying, that we refuse to allow whatever, you know, that catastrophic kind of, you know, production that we are witnessing through white supremacy, through masculinity, through, you know, heteronormativity, you know, through capital, through financialization, through, you know, all of these processes. We refuse to allow those processes to kill us.
Okay, that's.
I've answered all my questions, is that it?
Yeah.
I've answered all the questions that you haven't
You definitely can go home.
Because I'm struck, I like your idea about artists and writers and filmmakers and poets as being important and as providing a vision as well. You know, in the work that I do, I teach that artists teach us to see the world in ways that we would not normally see it. They teach us to see invisible things, and they make them visible to us as well. And I like the optimism that you begin to bring out, right, in this world of violence. Can you talk a bit about, I guess, before we go on to the questions, if you can talk a bit about what world you see emerging from the vision of the artist, right?
I mean, I'm not sure what those worlds would look like, but what I would say is that, you know, when we think of, you know, abolition, and we think of the idea of abolition, we're thinking about creation. We're not just thinking about getting rid of institutions that are violent. We're thinking about what can be replaced, what we can build that will be building a world that is ethical, and that is not based on harm, right? But it's based on care, right? Care for ourselves, for each other, care for ourselves, care for our planet, care for our environment, care, you know, for the way in which, you know, we live, so that we are prioritizing the lives and livability of people. When our emphasis should be on creating collective structures in our societies that actually, you know, that are meant to replace all of this, all of these structures that are steeped in violence and surveillance and policing and punishment and carcerality. There isn't an institution that exists that isn't a carceral institution. The schools are carceral because the way it treats the lives of Blacks and Indigenous and racialized people, in the sense that those lives are, especially the lives of Black people, are shaped in North America, in the West, and I would say globally, for death, right? We see necropolitics in action, you know, their lives are, prepared for death. You have, Black students being, the prison pipeline, the school to prison pipeline, where our schools are becoming, carceral in the sense that you're putting police in schools, you're putting police in universities. There are police everywhere. And what is that about? It is not about caring for the individual, it is about liability and property and the protection of property and dealing with issues of liability and protecting those, corporate responsibility and all of that, but it's not about people. And certainly those institutions are endemically and deeply racist, as we well know. It's deeply settler colonial, right? We continue to pretend that we live in a society that actually does care, does appreciate Indigenous people, does appreciate racialized Black, and we are diverse and we are just a wonderful everybody's living happily, and we have a nation that loves its people. We know that's not true. It loves some people, but it don't love all the people. And it certainly don't love Indigenous, Black, and racialized people. Okay?
You know what? Since we're just going,
trans people, I'm sorry, it don't love them. It love white, rich, middle class people who live according to a certain kind of heteronormativity and who adheres to a normalized kind of life, and a life built on capital and a life built on profit. Yes, yeah, but it don't love all the people.
since we're just going for it, first I want to say, so since we're just going for it, I'm going to keep going with this thread. First I want to say, like, yeah, and I just, I read Desmond Cole's book, The Skin We're In, in terms of like showing that how education has been, many different institutions have been turned into carceral, including education, since that's my field. Like, in theory, education was supposed to be in care of the parent, right? And local parentis care is supposed to be the primary thing. And as you say, and as we've been seeing, it's the opposite. And just today in Oshawa, I've already seen people in tears because one of the school board trustees is holding an anti-trans protest. And people, trans people and their families, especially all over the city, are in mourning right now, and this is an elected official anyway, and they're coming, they're saying, what should we do, how do we protest the protest, and I, as you were talking about all of the creativity, and I would that's where my brain was going too. Do you have any thoughts for the people of Oshawa right now, and how to kind of rise up or combat or dream or sing against like the hate that's being spread?
Well, listen, I want to be clear first and foremost that, while I think it's important for us to talk about, that we have to envision a new world. We're not there yet, okay? So I am not the most positive person in the world around where we are. There are moments when I am in deep depression over what is happening in our world, because I often don't see a way out. I think people who are imagining and thinking and trying to come up with ways to create new worlds are doing that on a daily basis, but knowing also that there's always something against which that is actually, being pushed, right? Where they're constantly pushing back against something that continues to weigh so many of us down. So it is a work in progress, right? It is a work in progress that we are building new worlds. So, so they're going out and protesting the protesters is another way to challenge that, right? And they should be doing that, right? They should be calling them out, right? So it is that kind of refusal to say, look, we will not back down, we will not disappear, we will not hide, we will stand up to you. You don't get to own anything. You don't get to decide that our lives don't matter, as queer and trans people. Yeah. We get to say, we get to stand here and say our children who are queer and trans lives matters in the schools, and they should be, there should be a place where they're safe and where they can be who they are in those situations. And we know that if those students are racialized and Black and Indigenous, that it actually, it adds so many other layers to that for them in those situations, right? So it is a struggle that we all, there's no end at this point. We are in a process of remaking and unmaking. But in that, we are also being challenged by a system that has been, constituted over eras and continue to replicate itself militarily and in terms of violently. And that is not easy to break, but it's possible to rid ourselves of that, right? And to rid ourselves of that, we have to start focusing on the way that our society continues to be enmeshed and structured through racism, capitalism, financialization, settler colonialism, and the way our society and heteromasculinity. We have to continue to see and to see how our societies are shaped and how it's global, and how whiteness and white supremacy operates in our society to maintain and to make it so difficult so that when we push through, we often sometimes have to get pushed back, and then we have to push forward. And in the meantime, we are creating possibilities and building ways to work together. So let me give you an example of how we can do this on a day-to-day basis and in the context of policing. The police now in Toronto, as we see more money, more budgets are going to police, right? More money is going into police and the policing budget and the carceral state, when that money should be going to create affordable housing, better social programs, etc., taking people out of poverty, and creating livable communities. But instead, it's going to police and surveil those communities. We've been told that there's an increase of violence on the subways, right? And that as a result of that, they have to add more police and more subway constables to pace the subways to ensure that people are safe. Well, police does not keep us safe. We've learned that from those who do abolition work, right? Like, Andrea Ritchie, Mariam Kaba, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and all the abolitionists. Police doesn't keep us safe. I know police doesn't keep us safe. I've worked in the movement for 40 years against police violence. They don't keep Black, Indigenous, and racialized people safe. The RCMP don't go onto lands to keep Indigenous people safe. They go there to take and to kill. Okay? So these people don't keep us safe. So there's no way that putting more police is going to end whatever is happening or what you perceive as an increase in crime on the subway. Rather, what should be done is that our government should be putting more money into creating, sustainable communities, putting money into communities for better housing, for better support, mental health, other kinds of health support crisis, other kinds of formed from the community, not by police, right? Not by police. And what is happening is that there has been a group of people who call, who are now activists, have come together around the TTC, and the way in which the TTC has become so policed. And they actually decide that they're going to intervene to offer people on the subway information in case they are arrested, they are violated, what to do, who to call, etc., to get support. So that's a kind of an intervention, a community kind of intervention to protect people, because we know that Black people, racialized people, poor people are harassed on the subway. We know that they are harassed on the streetcars, on the streets. They are harassed for taking shelter in the cold, in subway shelters, in stores, in banks. We know this. This is not new. So putting police and other security personnel in these places are only going to escalate the violence, and more people are going to die, right? So we now have to come up with alternative measures to intervene, to combat that, to find ways to protect people, to demonstrate that it's the people that's protecting the people, not the police, not the state.
Yeah, I mean, they couldn't even open the warming centers back up. Even the tiny Band-Aids are nothing compared to what you're describing, but
not that they couldn't, they wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, so many reasons to resign.
They have chosen not to.
Yeah, it's
right.
It's really,
but they're fine putting more money into in the coffers of police. They're fine putting more money into the hands of big business and corporations to build more condominiums that no one can live in, who needs a house, who needs housing in this time, right? So they have chosen property and profit over the lives of people and people who are most vulnerable.
Beverly, those are extremely important points to make about choices that leaders and politicians have made. How do you go about getting leaders and politicians to see that those are any choices that they've made? Because the rhetoric is that they are forced to do these things, and they use the language of protection, right, and care in order to justify increased surveillance.
We have to stop appealing to governments and states.
Okay.
I mean, how long are you going to keep appealing to governments and states and try to demonstrate to them that that what they're doing is against our interests? They know that's against our interests. We have to start building and creating our alternative ways of living in the middle of their catastrophic, context that they have created for us. We have to be the one to start, creating these alternatives, because we are imagining, envisioning, but we have to also build and create alongside as we imagine and build. And this is long term, right? This is not something that's overnight. It's a process. People have been building, listen, people have been doing this work for a long time. This is not new. This is not just new. Throughout the decades that we have seen people in civil rights movements and in the Black Power movement, in various movements, including in Idle No More and other movements, it's about people have been, rebuilding, but they have also been, they've also been pushing back, but at the same time resisting and attempting to create something different, right? Not rely on state and governments to actually change, because they will not change. They are embedded in a particular kind of system and structure that is about capitalism, that is about racism, that is about settler colonialism. That is their sustenance. So what we have to do is to stop appealing to these people, stop appealing to leaders, but resist, refuse what they're doing. And in order to do that, we have to build our own community collectives in spite of what they are trying to provide us with.
Yeah.
We have to continue to build these communities, support organizations that are doing this work to abolish, police, to abolish prisons, the work that, and particularly it's women who are at the forefront. You said this, David. It's Indigenous women. Look at Idle No More. It was Indigenous women in the leadership. It was, it's Black women in the leadership, Black, queer, and trans women in the leadership of change, of creating alternative structures. It's sex workers. It's all of those poor people, all of those who are marginalized are the ones who are on the ground creating alternative structures to ensure that we live, that people have livable lives. So the work is happening. The work is happening in spite of all of the attacks and all of the undermining that we are receiving from those governments. So we need to stop wasting our energies with our leaders because they're not listening to us. They have no intentions. We need to tell them what we know they're doing. We are aware exactly what they're doing, and they need to know that what they're doing continues to harm us and continue to violate us, but we will not succumb to that. We will resist. We will fight back. We will continue to build, to create a better world. We will get out there in the street. We will protest. We will protest when it's necessary to protest. We will call them out and call them out continuously whenever they continue to destroy our communities or environment, destroy people's lives. We will stand with the people who are standing and fighting back. We will use our voices. We will use our bodies. We will use our resources, whatever we have to to support each other and to create and to build and to think and to write and to talk and to engage, right? And to stay in relations with those who care about creating better worlds and livable worlds.
Beverly, as you were talking, I was thinking about the TRC and its report. And the foundational strategy of the TRC is truth, to tell the truth. And I assume that's what you're advocating, is to tell the truth about what we see in front of us from our perspectives and continue to speak and speak and speak and act and act and act and event. And
we know what we have witnessed with the discovery of children buried under residential schools across this country. And we know there are more. They weren't telling the truth, right? Because they knew that they were there, right? I mean, historically, they knew they were there. The church knew they were there. They all knew that these bodies were there, right? And this so-called discovery is not a discovery, right? It was never a discovery. It was never meant to come to light. You know what I mean? Okay, this is not a discovery. This is, I mean, what we have witnessed is that, death camps and death camps and death camps over the decades of that, that housed Indigenous people. It was never meant to come to light. It was never meant to be a discovery. So by calling it a discovery, as the state likes to call it, is some kind of a plea to innocence. It's like, oh, we never knew this ever happened. We are so sorry. We regret. We apologize. We all this. It isn't a discovery. I mean, Indigenous people have been saying this for decades. that their people have disappeared.
Yeah.
And they are buried elsewhere. I mean, nobody disappears into thin air. You know what I mean? And our governments never listened. And they continue not to listen to indigenous people.
Yeah. Now, telling the truth has its costs, right?
Mhm.
I mean, if we're going to tell the truth about Canada and its Black history, and its mistreatment of Black people, mistreatment of Japanese and Chinese people, mistreatment of Indigenous people, mistreatment of LGBTQ+ people as well. We challenge, right, everything. If we challenge the doctrine of discovery these days, we challenge the foundations of the state and question its legitimacy as well. And we're engaged then in a continuous struggle. Okay, how do we survive in that struggle? How do we maintain our optimism? I mean, I see you as an incredibly optimistic person, despite the fact that you say you're at the heart of what you're doing. You have this
Well, I think where my optimism lies is that I believe that struggle is the answer to changing the world. Right? I believe that the kind of struggle that is about struggle, a liberatory, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial struggle is the answer to changing the world. So I believe in the struggle to change the world. That's where my optimism is that it's about, I know that this is what we have to do in order for something different to happen, right? And we have seen momentary changes that have happened throughout our life. Oh yes, which means we know things can change. It's not like we haven't had examples of things changing. But we have also seen where situations we have been punished for standing up, just and shifting ground in certain ways, that we have borne the brunt of something more devious, right? Coming afterwards. We've seen that in terms of change of government. We have seen that in terms of change of particular kinds of, policies, right? So we have seen that. However, we do know, we have gotten a glimpse that things can change at many times through our refusal to back down, a continued struggle to speak the truth, to reveal the truth, to expose, what lies, beneath in terms of all of those, forms of violence. We know that there is evidence that things can change because we have done it, right? We have been building collectives. I've been part of many collectives as a feminist, as a Black radical activist. We have been building we've been doing this work. It's not new work that is happening now, but what it is where we are is that there is a kind of it's sustaining work, right? We're in a fight for our lives right now, and it feels very urgent. I think what the difference is here is urgency. There's a sense of urgency that I think we have, that at moments in the past we had, but not the way that we are thinking today, with a sense of urgency, which is that we are actually knowing that it's important for sustenance of a struggle, and it's urgent, but we're also in that process beginning to also look at all of the multiple ways that we have available to us to help us see through or to find ways through things. So we're not only looking at the protests on the street, we're not only looking at the raising of our voices, we're not only looking at taking up arms, but we're looking at what artists and writers and thinkers and scholars and dreamers are offering us as well, you know, in order to actually make those things, to find new ways of thinking and dreaming about new ways of creating a world.
Yeah.
And we are doing it. It's an everyday act. It's not something that we can do today and expect something tomorrow. It has to be sustained. It is an everyday act that we have to engage with. It has to be a sustained act. It has to feel urgent, and it has to continue. And it doesn't require one person to be some star or some individual who's going to fix the world. It's all of us. It has to be collective work that has to be done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know what I'm wondering, since it's International Women's Day, and I know you've spoken a bit about how important women's roles have been in this abolitionist work. I thought maybe I just give you another chance to, like, I guess I'm curious, like, how did you as a woman find your voice, and or like what advice would you give to the women out there in the audience today?
First and foremost, let's talk about, I mean, what your question on feminism and its relation to this work and abolition, right? And let's talk about, first and foremost, let's be clear. When we think, I think it's really critical to address the concept of abolition, and also to talk about what abolition is and why feminism and abolition is so intertwined. And when we think of, abolition, we have to think about what, something that Ruth Wilson, Gilmore said to us, that abolition is not just simply undoing, right? That abolition seeks to undo the ways of thinking and doing things, and I'm quoting her now, that sees prison and punishment as solutions for all kinds of social, economic, political, behavioral, and interpersonal problem. But it's not simply that. It's not simply decarceration, but reorganizing how we live our lives together in the world. And I want to say that when we think back at abolition and abolitionist struggles that was forged by Black women during slavery, that it was always, Black women always did not fight a singular fight around Blackness, nor the freedom to be free, but around the fact that one cannot be free if their entire whole self ain't free. And that's a feminist core piece.
Absolutely.
Black women said, I'm a woman, I'm Black, I'm poor, right? I'm enslaved, I am all of these things. And therefore, you can't, I'm a woman, and I'm a Black enslaved woman, and in my freedom will also be your freedom. My liberation will also be your liberation. And we see that when Indigenous women fight, it's the same. They stand in front of tanks and they say, my livability is your livability to the rest of their people, right? And to the rest of Indigenous people. Because the reality is that women have been on the front line of struggle for livability. Always, always, always. It has never been any other way, right? We have always been those who were on the front lines, those who were in the struggle, in the Black struggle around police violence. It was women who were at the front, in that struggle. Black women who were at the front in that struggle, who, while they were experiencing, gender oppression and homophobia and lesbophobia, they were at the front of the struggle because they're also Black women. And they understand that police brutalize and kill Black women too. And that is not new. That is not just recent with Breonna Taylor and others in the US. Black women have been, brutalized and killed by police for decades here in Canada, right? And Indigenous women have been killed and raped by police for decades in Canada. That is not new, right? Our lives have always been the lives that have been in jeopardy. As Black, as Indigenous, as racialized women, our gender, or race, or sexuality locates us in ways that makes us more predisposed to violence. And therefore, abolition and changing this structure, changing this system, creating new worlds, we are on the front line of this process as Black, Indigenous, racialized women, those who are queer and trans. We are on the front line of this struggle, and have been and always will be, because we understand the urgency, we understand the necessity, we understand that our livability is at risk. And in order for all of us to be able to live, we have to continue to do the work in the way that we do it.
Thank you. I think I really needed to hear that today. Thank you. Thank you for your words.
Okay, and I also want to thank you very much, Beverly, for your words today.
Thank you,
The
Karleen, and thank you, David.
highest praise I can give is that you are an artist.
Oh,
Artists show
okay.
us.
I'll take that. I
Yeah,
don't often think of myself as an artist,
Artists show us things that we don't see.
but I appreciate it.
They teach us to see the invisible, and you've done that today as
Thank
well.
you. Thank you for that. I take that. I'm honored by that. Thank you.
And I would also like to thank you, Beverly, on behalf of the School for Study of Canada, and to let you know that there are students in both Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies at the undergraduate and graduate level watching today, who I think will really needed to hear your message. I know some of your students are on the line on the Zoom call as well.
I mean, I'm on sabbatical, so I don't know.
Oh, I know they are. We did registration. And I want to thank you, thank the audience for listening. I want also to thank Karleen and David for really insightful questions and the wonderful, getting the wonderful flow of conversation that just springs when you ask Beverly a question. It's been a wonderful opportunity for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for inviting me.
And perhaps sometime when your book is done, we will see you here again in person.
Thank you.
Thank you all
very much.